Veteran found a Bigfoot chained to a tree. What happened next will break your heart. The mountains were frozen in silence that morning, as if God himself was holding his breath. A man walked alone through the snow, Daniel Cross, a veteran who had survived the war, but not the memories it left behind. They said his life was over, that a man can come home and still never truly return. The wind sliced across the valley, and every step echoed like a heartbeat inside a tomb. He followed the same trail he always did, hoping distance could bury the ghosts that followed. Then a sound, low, strained, almost human. He stopped. The creek below was half frozen, and beyond it, under a stand of cottonwoods, something moved. At first it looked like a shadow too heavy for light. Then he saw it a shape chained to a tree, massive, bleeding its breath, rising like steam from the snow. He stepped closer, slow, the air burning his lungs. And then he saw the eyes. Amber, old, tired. Not the eyes of a monster, but of a soul that had given up. Around its neck, a cracked strip of leather. Pinned to it, a note. 2 words scrawled in desperation: "Forgive me." Daniel froze. Forgive who? For what? The chains clinked softly, as if they too were begging to be released. He whispered, "Who did this to you?" The creature didn't move, only blinked. And in that silence, Daniel felt something shift inside him. He drew his knife. The sound of steel scraping the sheath tore through the cold air and through his memories. One pull, then another. Each twist of metal screamed like a war cry echoing through time. And when the last chain broke, the creature fell straight into his arms. Steam rose from its wounds. Its chest heaved, alive. Barely. Daniel whispered, "You're free." But deep down, he knew he was talking to himself. Before we begin, take a moment to comment your city below, and when this story ends, tell us, do you still believe monsters exist? Part I. The Decision. Snow clung to Daniel's coat as he carried the creature across the valley. The world was silent except for the sound of his boots grinding against the ice and the faint rattle of chains dragging behind him. The thing was impossibly heavy, every step a war against the slope, but something in him refused to let go. He didn't know why. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was recognition. All he knew was that leaving it there, chained, bleeding, abandoned, felt like walking away from the last piece of his own soul. His cabin came into view through the pale mist, a dark scar on the white hillside. He had built it to be far from everything, far from people, far from noise, far from the world that wouldn't stop burning, even when he came home. But as he pushed open the wooden door and felt the wind die behind him, he realized the silence inside was heavier than the snow outside. He laid the creature down on an old tarp breath, shaking hands raw from the cold. For a moment he just stood there, staring. The lantern light flickered across a body that looked both ancient and human. Thick fur, matted with blood, massive arms cut by steel chest, rising and falling like a mountain trying to breathe. Daniel knelt beside it. The air smelled of iron and ash. He touched the chains that still circled its wrists, tracing the deep wounds they had carved. Each mark looked like a memory he didn't want to remember. He grabbed his pliers and started to work slow, careful, trembling. Every snap of rusted metal echoed too loudly in the small cabin, like the sound of gunfire in a canyon. His jaw tightened. His heart wanted to flee. His hands refused to stop. When the last shackle fell away, he saw the creature's fingers twitch. Its eyes opened, halfway dull amber beneath the lamplight. For one suspended breath, Daniel thought it might lunge, might tear him apart for the pain he'd caused by freeing it. But it didn't. It just looked at him, not as prey, not as threat. Just looked. The kind of look a wounded soldier gives when he no longer knows if he wants to live. Daniel drew in a breath that scraped like gravel. "You're safe now," he said quietly. The words surprised him. He hadn't said them to anyone in years. The creature's gaze followed the sound of his voice, heavy lids, blinking once, slow, deliberate. He poured water into a basin, dipped an old towel, and began washing the wounds. Steam rose between them, blurring the lines of what either of them was supposed to be. The fur beneath the blood was coarse but warm, trembling faintly with every touch. Daniel spoke as he worked nonsense, really small words just to fill the air. "Had worse days, huh?" "Yeah, me too." The creature didn't answer, but its breathing steadied deep and rhythmic, until Daniel found his own chest moving with it, an unconscious synchrony that felt like prayer. Outside, the wind screamed across the ridge. Inside, only the quiet rasp of cloth against skin, the crackle of a lantern, the sound of two broken things refusing to die. When the wounds were wrapped, Daniel sat back exhausted. His palms were slick with sweat, his arms trembling. He should have been afraid. He wasn't. The fear had burned out somewhere between the first chain and the last heartbeat. All that was left was a strange, fragile calm. He pulled a blanket from the cot and draped it over the creature's shoulders. Its breath fogged the air in slow bursts. The chains lay piled on the floor beside them, a dark coil of ghosts. Daniel stared at them, then at his own hands, scarred, shaking human. Somewhere deep in the timber frame, the cabin creaked, settling under the cold. He whispered to no one, "You're free." Then, after a pause even softer, "So am I." And for the first time in years, Daniel didn't dream of war when he closed his eyes. He dreamed of wind moving through trees, of silence that didn't hurt, of something vast and wounded, learning how to breathe again. Part 2. The first night. The storm rolled in after sundown, carrying with it a hush so deep the forest seemed to hold its breath. Daniel sat by the stove, watching the lantern's flame tremble against the cabin walls. Behind him on the straw-lined floor, the creature lay still, its bulk filling half the room, its breath rising in thick, uneven clouds. He hadn't meant to keep it inside. He'd meant only to help to let it rest until morning. But the snow had sealed the door shut, and now the two of them were stranded together in the kind of silence that makes a man confront what he's been running from. He listened to the wind scrape at the roof, the hiss of snow through the chimney. Every creak of the logs reminded him of gunfire, of tents collapsing in desert heat, of men screaming for help. He rubbed the scar along his wrist, trying to anchor himself in the present. The air smelled of wet fur and smoke. It was almost comforting. He poured water into a bowl and set it beside the creature. "Here," he said quietly, voice hoarse from disuse. "You need this more than I do." The creature's head lifted slightly. Its nostrils flared. A low sound, half groan, half sigh, escaped its chest as it dragged the bowl closer and drank. Each swallow was deliberate, cautious, as if the simple act of trust required all its strength. Daniel caught himself smiling, small and tired. "That's it," he murmured. Slow and steady. Hours passed. The fire burned low, filling the air with the scent of pine resin and ash. Daniel dozed in the chair, half dreaming, his mind drifting through faces long gone. When the nightmares came, he didn't fight them this time. He let them roll through him like weather. Then a sound reached him, 3 soft knocks from the wall behind the stove. He blinked awake, confused. The knocks came again. 3. Pause. 3 again. Daniel turned, heart thudding. The creature lay where it had been, eyes open, glowing faintly in the firelight. Its massive hand rested against the timber wall, the same rhythm still tapping, 3, pause, 3. The sound wasn't a warning. It was steady calm, like the beat of a heart. For a moment, Daniel couldn't breathe. The pattern was familiar. In the field, medics used it to tell the wounded, "You're not alone." "I'm still here." He exhaled slowly, his chest loosening. "You trying to talk to me?" he asked. The creature blinked once the tapping stopped, then resumed 3 short beats, softer this time. Daniel nodded, voice trembling. "All right, I hear you." He leaned back, letting the rhythm fill the room. Each tap seemed to push the darkness a little farther away. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, 2 survivors breathed in time. After a while, Daniel reached for his coat and draped it across the creature's shoulders. The fur beneath was warm now, pulsing with life. He whispered, "We'll make it through the night, you and me." The creature's eyelids sank halfway. Its chest rose and fell slow even. Daniel settled beside the stove, back against the wall. The tapping faded, replaced by the deep rhythmic sound of sleep. He sat there until dawn crept through the shutters, painting the cabin in silver. For the first time since coming home from war, Daniel didn't wake to the echo of explosions. He woke to breathing steady, shared, alive. He looked at the creature, saw the faint light of morning on its face, and felt a strange warmth bloom behind his ribs. It wasn't victory, it wasn't peace, it was something quieter, rarer. It was trust. And Daniel realized then that in saving the creature, he had given himself the one thing he never thought he'd feel again: belonging. Part 3. The Fire in the Valley. The thaw came late that year. The snow melted in streaks along the ridge, leaving patches of dark, breathing earth. Days stretched longer, the air softer, but the cold still lingered like memory. Daniel split wood outside the cabin, glancing every so often at the barn where the creature rested. Ridge, that's what he had begun calling him. The name had come without thought, just something that felt right, like the mountain itself had whispered it into Daniel's ear. Ridge had grown stronger. He could stand now, stooping under the beams of the barn, his shoulders brushing the rafters. His wounds had scabbed over the deep grooves on his wrists, fading into thick bands of scar. He ate little, mostly what Daniel offered: apples, jerky, water. But there was a calm intelligence in his eyes, a quiet gratitude that didn't need words. Sometimes at dusk, Daniel would sit outside the door, while Ridge watched from the shadows within. The two would listen to the wind move through the valley, and though neither spoke, something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that they were both survivors of a war neither had asked for. That peace ended the night the fire came. It began as a faint orange glow over the northern ridge, the kind of light you mistake for sunrise until the smell hits you: smoke, dry pine, burning resin. Daniel stepped outside, saw the sky pulsing red above the tree line. Within minutes, the wind turned, carrying sparks down into the valley. The air grew thick, hot, alive with the roar of flame. He ran for the barn, shouting, "Ridge, we have to move." The horses were already screaming, stamping against their stalls. He fumbled with the latches, hands shaking. Behind him came a crash, a sound so deep it seemed to shake the ground. Ridge had torn the barn door open. For a heartbeat they just looked at each other, man and giant, both knowing what the other would do. Daniel tried to guide the animals out, coughing as smoke bit into his lungs. The world shrank to fire and panic. Sparks clung to his sleeves, caught in his hair. Somewhere in the chaos, the memory of desert heat and mortar fire crashed over him. He froze, the same paralysis that had almost killed him once before. The noise, the light, the choking air, it was all the same. He dropped to his knees, covering his ears, gasping for breath that wouldn't come. Then something massive struck him from the side, knocking him flat. Heat washed over his face, and when he opened his eyes, Ridge was above him, arms spread wide, shielding him from a falling beam. The creature's roar cut through the roar of the fire itself, deep and commanding. Ridge turned, grabbed a fallen post still burning at one end, and slammed it against the fence until it gave way. The horses bolted through the gap, fleeing into the open fields. Daniel, dazed, crawled to his feet, watching as Ridge drove the rest of the animals ahead, using his own body as a wall between them and the flames. Every movement was deliberate, purposeful, almost human. The night burned. The valley glowed like the inside of a furnace. And through it all, Ridge stood unbroken, a shadow carved from fire and mercy. When dawn came, the smoke lay heavy over blackened earth. The town gathered at the ridgeline, staring into the valley where the last embers still hissed. They had seen it all: the giant creature dragging livestock from the fire, carrying a man through the smoke. What they'd once called a monster now stood at the heart of salvation. Daniel leaned against a charred fence post, face streaked with ash. Ridge beside him, breathing hard, but alive. Someone whispered, almost afraid to believe it. It saved him. No one argued. In the pale light of morning, Daniel looked at Ridge and felt the weight of every chain he had cut, every fear he had ever carried. The creature's fur was singed, his eyes still glowing faintly in the haze. Daniel reached out, hesitated, then placed his hand against Ridge's arm. Warm, solid, real. No words were spoken. None were needed. The fire had taken the fences, but it had left something else. something stronger than the walls Daniel had spent years building. For the first time, he realized that the valley, the world, and even his own heart might not be beyond saving. And somewhere far above the smoke, a hawk screamed over the ridge, its cry sharp and wild like a promise that what was once broken could still be made whole. Part 4. Ridge is free now. By dawn, the fire had died, leaving the valley black and breathless. Daniel stood among the ashes, his face streaked with soot. The barn behind him nothing but twisted iron and smoke. At the edge of the clearing, Ridge waited, burned, scarred, but alive. Then came the trucks, engines growling, men with rifles stepping out into the cold. Their orders were simple: contain it. End it. Daniel stepped forward before they could raise their guns. Don't, he said, voice breaking. You point that thing, you'll have to shoot through me. The ranger hesitated. The crowd that had gathered farmers' families, the same people who'd once called Ridge a monster, stood in silence. They'd seen the truth with their own eyes. A creature that saved life, not took it. The rifles lowered. The wind sighed. A young biologist spoke softly. No cages. Let him stay. Observe, don't hunt. And just like that, the war ended, not with bullets, but with mercy. Daniel walked to the old cottonwood, the same tree where it had all begun. He took the torn note from his pocket, the one that read, "Forgive me," and buried it beneath the roots. Then, with his knife, he carved 4 simple words into the bark: Ridge is free now. When he turned, Ridge was watching. The creature stepped close, silent, towering eyes golden in the gray light. Slowly, he pressed one massive hand to Daniel's chest, right over his heart. No roar, no words, just breath. Then Ridge turned toward the mountains. Snow began to fall again, soft, forgiving. Daniel watched him fade into the mist, until only the echo of footsteps remained. The valley exhaled. The silence was no longer empty. Daniel whispered, "You're free now, Ridge, and maybe so am I." Part V. The Lesson. Spring returned quietly that year. The snow melted from the ridge in thin silver streams, and the air carried the scent of wet earth and pine. Daniel stood outside his rebuilt barn, the sound of hammer and wind filling the valley. The scars on the land were fading, and so were the ones inside him. He had started something new, a small program that paired wounded veterans with rescued animals. The idea had come one morning while he was mending the fence. Healing doesn't always wear a human face. The valley that once echoed with gunfire and fear now rang with the soft clatter of hooves, the laughter of men who hadn't smiled in years. Daniel walked along the paddock where a young Marine stood beside a chestnut horse. The soldier's hands shook as he tried to place the halter. Every movement was stiff, afraid. Daniel recognized that tremor. He'd lived inside it. "Easy," Daniel said gently, stepping closer. "You're not fighting him. You're meeting him." The Marine swallowed, nodding, but the tension didn't leave. The horse shifted, nostrils flaring. "Breathe," Daniel whispered. "Match him. Slow it down." He laid a steady hand on the Marine's shoulder. Together they exhaled. Once, twice. The horse lowered its head, ears flicking toward them. In that fragile silence, Daniel saw the miracle happen. The rope slackened, the tremor eased, 2 wounded spirits finding the same rhythm. Trust. It was small, but it was everything. He smiled, stepping back. "That's it. Just breathe with him." As the others worked in the distance, feeding, grooming, repairing, the light spilled through the valley, warm and gold. Daniel felt the same quiet warmth spreading through his chest, the kind he'd once thought he'd never feel again. Every heartbeat seemed to echo Ridge's slow, grounded alive. Sometimes at night, when the volunteers had gone and the fields glowed under moonlight, Daniel would sit by the fence and listen to the animals breathe. The rhythm was the same one that had once tapped through the cabin wall, 3 knocks, a pause, 3 again. It had become the pulse of the land itself. He spoke softly into the dark as if Ridge could still hear him. "You were right. We don't heal by forgetting. We heal by remembering together." The wind stirred, gentle, wrapping around him like an answer. The world no longer felt divided between man and beast, between silence and voice. It was all one heartbeat now. And in that quiet, Daniel understood the final lesson Ridge had left him, that freedom was never just about breaking chains. It was about learning to stay open once they were gone. He looked toward the distant tree line where the smoke had once risen, and now only sunlight played among the pines. The past no longer haunted him there. It simply watched, patient, forgiven. Daniel closed his eyes and let the wind move through him, carrying the rhythm he'd come to trust. It sounded like breathing. It sounded like peace. Ridge is free now. The morning light broke over the valley, soft and golden. Daniel stood beneath the old cottonwood, watching the mist rise from the creek. The carving on the bark was still there, weathered, rough but clear. Ridge is free now. He placed his hand against the words, feeling the life beneath them, the hum of the earth, the rhythm of breath shared between man and wilderness. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a deep sound rolled through the forest, steady, familiar. Ridge was still out there, alive, whole, free. Daniel smiled, whispering, "You're free now, Ridge. And maybe so am I." The wind carried the words away like a prayer. The valley exhaled. The world was quiet again, not empty but healed. He turned toward the cabin, the rising sun painting the hills in gold. Every step felt lighter, every breath like forgiveness. If this story touched you, take a moment to comment your city below and tell us where you're watching from tonight. And if you believe that kindness can cross every boundary, even between man and monster, leave your rating from 0 to 10 and subscribe for the next chapter of Bigfoot Tales, because somewhere out there in the wilderness, mercy is still alive.